We are live! Hello! Welcome to the Bard Book Club. Today we're talking about Romeo and Juliet. William Shakespeare, who was smart.
We're waiting on our guest, actress and historical interpreter, Laura Rocklyn. She's running a little late, so we're going to get started.
Here she is.
Oh, she's here. Hi!
Hello. How are y'all doing?
We're great. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's fun to get to join you all tonight.
We're so excited you're here. So everyone, this is Laura Rocklyn. You tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with Shakespeare. I saw you personally in Pride and Prejudice at the Annapolis Shakespeare Company a few years ago.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
Yeah, I saw
you working in Shakespeare for a long time.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and how you feel about Shakespeare.
Well, I did a double major in undergrad, as lots of theater people do, doing theater and English lit, because I loved the two of them. And I got lucky that my first job offer out of college was to do a year-long national tour doing Shakespeare with Olney Theater Center's national players. And so I got to share Shakespeare and teach workshops in Shakespeare all over the country. And from living with it like that, I really fell in love with it. And I've been working as a classical actress ever since. I got an MFA in classical acting at the Shakespeare Theater Company's Academy for Classical Acting and got to study further. But now I work a lot, as you said, with Annapolis Shakespeare Company and with Chesapeake Shakespeare Company. And I also work as a teaching artist, and doing Shakespeare with middle and high school students is one of the most fun things. I always love getting to see what they come up with.
So what's your experience with Romeo and Juliet that we're discussing today?
So I first played Juliet in undergrad. It was one of my sort of senior shows, which I got to work on. And then I've recently played Lady Capulet. But I've also been teaching this play with middle and high schoolers for a long, long time, which I thoroughly enjoy doing. And I think actually now that I'm looking back, one of my first introductions to Shakespeare was through the Zeffirelli film of Romeo and Juliet. I think it's similar for lots of people, yeah. But I remember being really captivated by the song that's sung at the party, and just sort of getting into the mystery and the beauty and the magic of the verse in that. So it's a play that's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah.
So Bridget, you want to tell us your general thoughts on reading Romeo and Juliet? Had you read it? I can't remember. Have you read it before? We read it.
Yeah, I read it in high school for class, and it was a fun time. I think I read it sophomore year, I want to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read it freshman year.
Yeah, I feel like it was sophomore year. I think freshman year we read A Midsummer Night's Dream, and then we read Romeo and Juliet. And it was really good, obviously.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's just like a really well-crafted play, and it's very famous for a reason. Mm-hmm. And it's just such like a universal story that I feel like a lot of people can relate to, of young love and everything. So I think it's done really well. And I think it does a good job of like crafting the different characters, and like the setup from the beginning really like gets you invested in like what's happening, even though you know how it's going to end, which is cool.
Yeah, I always say it must have been crazy to be in the first audience ever to see this when it comes out, with the chorus just being like, they're going to die, and then tell the story anyway. I read it when I was 14 in high school, and then read it a bunch of times since then, because it's like, it's up there as like one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and people act like it's a personality trait to like not like this play. They're like, there's better plays. That one's overhyped. And it's like, everyone knows what this play is for a reason. The balcony scene is one of the most famous scenes for a reason.
It's also kind of like what we said just prior to this about like watching the endings before and like knowing how it's going to end. It's like, it's about the journey it takes to get there rather than like just because you can know the ending and not know how it happens and how it
ends. Like when you read classics a lot anyway, you know how they end. Even like when I read Jane Eyre, I knew how that ended for the first time. So yeah, I think it's great. It's timeless. I think it's so well balanced in how it starts so funny and so lighthearted with the jokes and all the miscommunications, and then it's a natural progression to really tragic. I feel like tonally, modern day people and classic writers struggle to like shift their play narratively, like tonally, from like really funny to really serious. And I think I've always thought this play does a really good job because it's so funny in the beginning, and then it blends into a tragedy. So yeah, it's one of my favorites. I also just like it because it is easier to literally understand the language than a lot of Shakespeare plays, which is obviously why they teach it in high schools so much, because it's easy to understand like fully what they're saying.
It's helpful.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree. I mean, I love, one of the things that's so interesting about this play is that I feel like it's up until the point when Mercutio dies that it's a comedy. And then all of a sudden it snaps.
Yeah.
And it's
like, oh shit, there's death.
Yeah, like, it just got real. Yeah.
They didn't really, I think that's when Juliet and Romeo, I think like their parents' hatred and the ramifications of breaking all those rules is more just of an idea to them until that exact moment. Because even when Juliet's like, you'll die if they catch you here at her balcony, he's like, oh, then let them kill me, then I live a life without you. Like they're teenagers, they're like, we're gonna live forever, nothing can get us. And then that is like Romeo's dicking around in that scene where he's like, oh, Tybalt, I love you, you're my family. And then that's the wake up of like, no, this is very real, this prejudice and this hatred is very real, and if you guys wanted to be treated as adults, you needed to understand what the world you were, even as stupid as this hatred is, like that's the world you were in. And so Bridget, do you want to talk about characters?
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of like making them all so different and unique. And I think Romeo and Juliet are obviously like very iconic, and I think it's fun to like think about them and like how they would act if they were like here today. Like I wrote a play last semester for my playwriting class, and it was like this girl fell into a Shakespeare world, and so a lot of them were like meeting different characters and everything, and one of the main characters was Romeo, and he was just like messing around, hits on all the women, and it's like, but like then he also has like the softer side of like when he actually like falls in love, and then like but like that's also so fickle that I think it's interesting to look at. And then Friar Lawrence is just dumb.
Yeah,
it's all his fault.
When I like explained like the intricacies of this play to my sister last year, 'cause she'd never read it, she was like, so a grown man's just like giving kids drugs. I'm like, yeah.
And then
communication is top notch. Like,
yeah, he was like, this is a good idea.
And the moment that always gets me is at the party scene when Lord Capulet realizes Romeo's there, and Tybalt wants to kick him out, and Lord Capulet's like, no, he's a nice boy, let him stay. So you have a feeling if the friar had ever gone to the parents and said, your children are in love, let them get married, parents might actually have been reasonable.
Yeah, it's just everyone. It's the idea of like no one was willing to budge in their conviction.
No one wanted to talk about it. They just talked about their feelings.
Their children's, and but their children's end could remove the idea that it takes something this horrific to show. I do think that also plays in the idea of, and this is a big argument today, especially in the online book community, about YA books. And like we make teenagers so dramatic, or they act like so like wise beyond their years. And it's the idea that like, if you're a teenager, how could you know what love is? How could you know what this is? And the idea of Romeo and Juliet, one of the things that I think always makes it so timeless is the idea of like, these kids didn't know hatred. You have to be taught to hate someone. So these kids knew that they loved each other. They knew that the world they lived in made no sense because it was senselessly hateful. And they thought that they could be strong enough to like outwit that hatred. And obviously that cost them their lives.
But also there's like that innocence there as well.
Yeah, it's the innocence of thinking like we can fix it. We can overcome it.
And not having those experiences in the past to like refute that and be like,
they didn't know any different. They know that they think they know they can do it, and then obviously they can't. And that's what shows the parents obviously like this hateful end we've created. I last year, when you could go places in the world, went to see a ballet of this at the Moscow Ballet was touring, and they stopped in Baltimore. And the last shot of the ballet was, and like I was crying, like as if I don't know how this ends. And it was, we're both in white, and the families came in, and each side of the family like lifted Romeo and Juliet up, and then the fathers came forward and like embraced each other, and the lights went, and like they were crying and the lights went out, and it was just like there was like this hesitation, and then they embraced, and it's like this horrific thing. And how they say in the play like, we'll resurrect statues, we'll do this, but it's like this is what it took to get rid of your prejudice. And I don't know. I always like the dichotomy in the characters between the kids, essentially, like Romeo and his friends and Juliet.
I love Mercutio. He's just so fun.
Yeah, he's great. And I love Benvolio.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts, Laura, on the characters of Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, they're so beautifully distinct from each other. And I mean, one of the things I love about this play, and I guess all of Shakespeare, is that Juliet is one of the smartest characters in the play.
Yes.
And she talks rings around Romeo. And it's just so fun in that balcony scene to see him be totally smitten and begging for attention. And she's also totally smitten, but she's still the voice of reason, being like, don't swear by the moon. Don't do these stupid things. Like, actually think through this. And I love seeing sort of these female characters that really run the show, which is fabulous. Yeah.
I think that's another reason this became one of the most popular ones, because even though obviously, yes, Juliet dies in the end, there's, in most Shakespeare plays, in the tragedies, there's like the one woman. Like there's Lady Macbeth, there's Ophelia, there's like the two wives and Julius Caesar. And they all die by the end of it. And so, yes, Juliet dies, but she has so many scenes and so much autonomy up till the end. And then there's the nurse and Lady Capulet.
And she also just like plays such a large role, like in comparison to like even like those ones that you listed.
Yeah,
like
she's so prominent.
She's miles ahead. Like it's Romeo and Juliet. It's not just like Romeo.
Well,
like,
and she dies in the very end, whereas like Lady Macbeth and Ophelia die like well before the play is over.
Yeah, they die like beginning of Act 5. She is almost the end of the play.
To what you were saying, Laura, when we when our group did our live reading of this, Bridget and I played Romeo and Juliet, and Bridget was Juliet. And doing the balcony scene with Bridget, I always say Bridget's my favorite person to act opposite of, but it was just, I'd always said I thought it would be interesting if two women did the play. Two women were Romeo and Juliet, because I felt like if it was sapphic, that adds to the idea of like they're not supposed to be together.
It's also like back in the day, it would have been two men. So like to switch that.
Yeah, so then also that to switch it. But yeah, when reading opposite Bridget, and I went back and watched it, and so much of it is me just like grinning as Romeo and Bridget's just going with these monologues. And I was going back and cracking up at you were like, it's too rash, it's too quick. Like it was so funny. And the playwright, Charlotte Aline, talks about this a lot too, like how Juliet is so funny. Like she's the funniest character, and she's so smart and witty. And Romeo's just like, yeah, whatever, sure, that's what you want to do, great, let's do it. Whereas he had been like so posturing at the beginning of the play, like I'm in love with Rosalind and I'm such a man.
It's also just funny to see that like transition of like he's like, oh my god, I'm so in love with her, and then he sees Juliet and he's like, oh my god, like
Lawrence is like, what the hell? He's like, it's been like, hours, like.
And then I just wanted to comment also on one other character was that we haven't mentioned, but like Paris, I feel like he's only cool when Paul Rudd played him.
Yeah, Paris goes one of two ways. Like you can either do it as like Paris is just like a genuinely like normal okay guy who just wants a wife, or he's like
looking for love,
or you like cast him as like some creepy older guy who's like, I want a hot young bride. And like, since it's not really in the text, because you know he says like bury me in the tomb next to Juliet, and so it makes you think like, did he also care?
And I also, another thing that's not strictly in the text, but I always find interesting, you know, because Lady Capulet, if she had Juliet at 13 and Juliet's now 13, Lady Capulet's probably about 26. She's a very young woman.
Oh, you're slacking.
I'm older than Lady Capulet.
She's having an affair with Tybalt, and that's why she freaks out so much when he gets killed. Has always fascinated me. I've always wanted to see the spin-off Lady Capulet Tybalt play.
Somebody write that. That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
It's an interesting dynamic to layer in there.
Yeah, my cousin kind of thing. I've always thought it's ridiculous that Benvolio just like rats Romeo out. Like as soon as the pen shows up, he's like, here's what went down. I'm like, you're not helpful. This
like,
is
okay. No one likes that.
15th century. Just make something up. They don't have security cameras.
He fell on this sword.
You know, it's just like someone else did it. Like no one's gonna know. Every time I read it, and Benvolio is just like, this is what happened. Romeo did this. I'm like, you're not helpful. It's ridiculous. Like,
because there's a limit to which one needs to always
you know, it's like, all right, there's a time and a place, Benvolio.
Calm down.
So the plot, it's like the outline for so many love stories is Romeo and Juliet, and like, you know, then like West Side Story. for our movie adaptation this month, High School Musical, which I always like make people shook when I say that's Romeo and Juliet. They're like, our friend Gabby was like, you said that, and I was like, why are we watching that for this? And she was like, and then I thought about it, was like, wait, that is Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, I told my roommate that, and she really loves High School Musical, and she was like, I was like, you didn't realize that? And she was like, no. I love
telling people that that's my favorite Romeo and Juliet adaptation, because then they're like, oh my God, you're right, it is.
I was like, why did you think we were watching it? And she was like, I don't know.
Just for fun. Obviously, it ends a little better for them in High School Musical.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about this plot that makes it so enduring, like that it continues to be redone in different ways? Just constantly, and everyone knows this plot. Like, even if you've never read the play, like, people know essentially like the main beats of what happens in this. Taylor Swift just redid Love Story. Like,
yeah, I think it's such a universal story, and because there are like those specific beats throughout the play, like you can follow it without doing it the same exact way. Like you just like have those ideas that are very prevalent. And like I think it's so well known for a reason. Like, and like they come right out of the gate with it, like as we talked about. But like it's iconic. They're like the chorus walks on, and they're gonna die. Like I think like that just kind of like is like very bold to do. And I think also it's kind of that enemies to lovers vibe of like they hate each other and like they can't be together, and yet they're gonna fall in love anyway. So I think that idea, like, a lot of people love good enemies to lovers romance. So I think that plays into it. And like, this is kind of like one of the founding enemies to lovers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think just having sort of the intensity of this young love that's at the center of it really appeals to a lot of people, because it is sort of the ideal of this love at first sight and love, attempting to triumph over all. I mean, one of my favorite Shakespeare lines is from this play, which is, my bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. And just the idea that you have infinite love, so the more you love someone, the more you can love them. It's such a gorgeous idea.
It is. It's like the idea of, like you said, like it doesn't take away from you, it gives to you to love someone as much. And everyone, there's all those like tepid takes everyone says that are like Tumblr memes where they're like, they knew each other for 5 days. Like, shut up.
But that's kind of the point, though.
It's like, that's not the point. And they're like, they're dumb teenagers. And I'm like, first of all, I always subscribe to the idea that like in a piece of fiction, the timestamp of relationships just does not subscribe to how it works in real life. Like, and so, like, the web series that Bridget and I are a part of right now is all happening over 24 hours. And, you've seen movies and shows like in the Hunger Games. How long are they in the Hunger Games for? And her and Peter are like, we're in love at the end. And Twilight, it's like, he sees her once. He's like, I'm in love with her. Like, it's absurd because it's a story. Like, and back then also in the time period, when this is set, a week wouldn't be seen as some absurdly short period of time to know.
It's a different concept of time.
Yeah, like, so the concept of time then and in a story in general is going to be different. And
I mean, also that's like from the start, like Juliet's mother is like, you're getting old. We got to marry you off to someone,
Yeah, she's like, you're like, what, 14? We got to get this.
Oh my God, the days are numbered.
Like, you're
someone.
You're an old maid. Moving along. I also like that this play unapologetically focuses on their romance, because Bridget and I were actually talking about this before it went live, because I was saying I'd learned that the author Diana Gabaldon, who wrote Outlander, gets like low-key offended if people refer to Outlander as a romance when that's what it is. As I'm like, the romance and the sex is like the number one reason people consume that show or that book. And so romance is looked down on as like this lesser genre and a genre just for women and not a lot of merit to it. And I also see people who argue like, oh, you can't view Romeo and Juliet as a romance. You have to view it as a tragedy. And I'm like, it's a tragic romance. That's
the tragic part is the romance.
Because 90% of this play is just about the two of them trying to figure out how to be together. Like,
and the whole plot is because of you can't, if you take the romance out, there's not a
story
play
without it. And I just like that, obviously romance has played a part in many, many Shakespeare plays, but this is the only like non-comedy one where it's so center and the woman is so prominent in like a non-comedic way, like in a serious way. So.
Yeah, and I also love about the romance in this play that it's really rebellious. I mean, as you say, this is a time period in which you often didn't meet the man you were going to marry until he lifted your veil at the altar.
Yeah.
So the fact that they have seen each other at a party is huge.
Yeah.
They're saying, I see you, I love you, and I choose you. And that Juliet, as the 13 or 14-year-old girl, is fighting for this is really pretty fabulous. Because her father's not kidding in that scene. He could just lock her in a convent and say, you don't want the guy I want? Tough luck.
Yeah, it was to attempt to have any autonomy about literally anything as a woman was pretty, reckless enough. And obviously, like she dies, Shakespeare women be dying. That's just how it goes.
Just like supernatural women.
I don't think the man was like this radical feminist, but I definitely think he had respect for women that a lot of writers and just people at the time did not have to write. Like obviously, men had to play these characters, but to write, it'd be easy to not write such prominent women characters if you knew you had no women to play them, and to do it anyway, and to create this archetype of Juliet who would become just synonymous with the romance genre. And like, just, she shows up everywhere. She shows up in Twilight, and she shows up in all these different musicals and movies. And so it's just, it's a reason that I would argue this is the most famous one. Like it's the one that everyone knows the most from, that everyone could tell you. Yeah. Even if people have like heard Macbeth or they've heard Hamlet, if you ask
tell you the plot of everything,
they really walk you through it. And the same thing with like Midsummer Night's Dream is they'd be like, everyone falls in love with the wrong person would be like about all they had. But everyone essentially knows the gist of the plot of this. They can name characters. So many of like the most famous lines quoted out of context come from this. Like Westworld like really harped on these violent delights have violent ends, and there's just lines from this play everywhere. Constantly, like the line Laura said is everywhere. Like my love is as boundless as the sea is a thing.
The balcony scene is just like one of the most iconic scenes, I think.
It's just actually that's the most famous Shakespeare scene in the Shakespeare canon. That's why when we were getting ready to read it in the private Zoom chat, I was like, here we go. I was like, we're going to do it. We're going to do the big scene. Because it's like, I remember like a Hey Arnold episode where they were doing the balcony scene, and like a Ned's Declassified episode doing the balcony scene. Like everyone knows it. And so obviously people think it's cool to be like, there's better stuff. It's like, shut up.
Yeah, popular things can't possibly be good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things teaching this play once to a group of middle schoolers who did not know it at all. I had one little boy raise his hand and say to me, I don't understand how this author got away with writing a play with so many cliches in it. And so of course I had to say they're cliches because he wrote them. And that's I love that he recognized so much of it, that was his response. I thought that was kind of fabulous.
It's like Shakespeare like literally invented these romance cliches that everyone knows now, and
it's also weird because it's like now they're so prominent that like it's all cliche and like what's gonna happen and everything, but it's like back then it wasn't. So like even though you're hating on it because it's so prominent and like popular now, it's like that's because of this play. It's not like it made that popular.
Literally, again, like the fact, like it's in a Taylor Swift song, like that there's an entire Taylor Swift song that is this play, like because and
iconic song, one of her best,
honestly. And it's like I don't think I had read Romeo and Juliet when that song came out, and
I definitely hadn't. I was in 4th grade. I remember dancing to it during recess.
You were like, yes, I feel this. Yeah, so. And she re-released it. We all were like, yes. It's like I've never heard this before.
Brand new.
Are you guys ready to move on to themes? Because I have a theme I've been like waiting to talk about.
Sure.
Okay. So it's the theme of femininity in this, and how a lot of times it's vilified, when really like the women are the only voices of reason in this. So like when Romeo first shows up and is being, a little bitch, like whining about everything, there's constantly lines by Mercutio and Benvolio basically like telling Romeo to like man up. And the Friar Lawrence literally says at one point, like, if you are a man, and I know when we did it the way Austin read it, Austin was like, if you're a man, like, like poking at Romeo. And is Romeo like emphasizing I'm in love with a woman, and Benvolio was like, yeah, I guessed as much. And obviously there's queer coding in Shakespeare stuff, is that when he kills himself, he does it with poison, which was seen as a super feminine way to kill yourself back in the day.
Yeah.
Women were poisoners. And especially around the time period in which
I watched the thing about, I don't know what I watched, but
yeah, like, because like Catherine de Medici was like a huge famous poisoner, and that was just a thing that was known, that women were poisoners.
And Lindsay Ellis's new video, I think she talked about that as well.
And so they, like, the whole time Romeo is like battling his masculinity, because he needs to like be seen as, toxic masculinity that he's kind of like wearing as a face. And then when he's with Juliet, that's when she's basically like, cut the bullshit, stop acting like that. And he does. And then when he thinks he doesn't get to have Juliet anymore, the way that he kills himself is in this like feminine way. And then the way she kills herself with a dagger is like a very like masculine battlefield type way to kill herself, which shows that like she was the like one who wore the pants, as dumb as that thing is, but like she's the one who like drove their love to not, because if it was up to him, this would have been like some chaotic one night stand. They would have gotten caught, would have been a mess, and then she would have married Paris and they would have moved on. Like she navigated the whole thing for them. And so the fact that they like vilified femininity the whole play, whereas like, Lady Capulet was like, let's use our brains here. The nurse was trying to help, but was also like, let's be smart. And Juliet, obviously, and then Rosalind just dodged a bullet with this whole ordeal. The woman.
But to be fair, she probably would have gotten away with it fine if she fell in love, because like they didn't have the
true
whole argument of their parents.
Yeah, I find that really interesting that the play with like the most prominent woman character in all of the Shakespeare canon is a play that like argues over like how valiant, I guess, like feminine attributes can be.
But it's also interesting, kind of building on that idea, is that because Juliet kills herself with the dagger, it's like the women can still be strong and like everything like that. Like putting her in that masculine role really exemplifies what an important character she is in the play and like her value as a character, because so often the women kill themselves off screen and it's like off stage and everything, and like you don't see it because they're not really the central roles. It's just like the central characters. Like even in like King Lear, there's like all of the women that all die off stage, versus like Lear dies right there on stage just because like he's the main one. So like
also like when the women like Lady Macbeth and Ophelia and not Cordelia, the forget which one, Portia from Julius Caesar, all kill themselves off screen, and they all do it like because of a man, but the man, even if he dies at the end, he's not dying because of the woman. And Portia like swallows hot coals, which is just absurd. That's an absurd way to go. But this is the only one where the man technically kills himself first and is doing it over the idea of not having her, whereas like Ophelia just went crazy because she couldn't have Hamlet, and Lady Macbeth went crazy and Portia just couldn't bear it. This is the only time where like Juliet had her wits about her, and basically
through.
Wow, the woman was thinking.
I mean, it's interesting too, thinking about that one of the centerpieces of the play is Mercutio's Queen Mab's speech, which essentially is dealing with the dangerous nature of female sexuality. And it's right smack in the middle of the play, saying, I know what your problem is, Romeo. You're being tormented by the fairy queen. So even though Juliet is actually the voice of reason, saying, what satisfaction canst thou have tonight? Let's be reasonable. There's an idea among the young men that they're all getting manipulated by these sexy females. And that's kind of an intriguing element that's running underneath it, I think.
I think it also plays, because obviously there's a popular theories that Shakespeare was bisexual or gay, and there's definitely tons of evidence for queer coding in his plays, especially the comedies. Like the constant theme of cross-dressing is like hella there. And, you can infer in a lot of the way that Romeo is talking to Benvolio Mercutio that they almost suspect he likes men at times and is like
where he's like, I'm in love with a woman, and he's like, okay.
And and again, like when we did it in our reading, like obviously, like you say, Bridget, we were choosing to play that. Like it was funny. Like in our Zoom chat, we literally, Laura, were like choosing to play it like it was that everyone thought Romeo was gay. And so our friend David, who played opposite me when I was like, I love a woman, they were like, yeah, I guess as much. Like, because the way that everyone's like, oh, you're so girly, blah, 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 is, similar to how, in the past 20 some years, people would mock someone for being gay. But that in the end, it's almost the idea of like, men don't get to express their feelings. And Juliet's like, let's express our feelings. And so it's like, the power of femininity is what gave them, is what they would have like been able to be together if the men weren't stupid in the streets and fighting over nothing. And so again, it's like the manly pursuits is what ruined everything. And so that's my theme.
I think also like kind of building on that theme into a different theme. The idea of like the connection between love and violence and how like one always kind of leads to the other, and like those two are so closely linked throughout the play and throughout like
these violent violent ends.
Like, so I think that's also very prevalent. If anyone else wants to
and that lovely sort of Renaissance double entendre that to die also meant to orgasm.
Yeah,
that's every time Juliet talks about dying in Gallop Apace. Yes.
Yeah. It's like that whole big speech where she's like, I don't remember it verbatim, but it's like, if Romeo should die, let him be a star. Like that whole thing. I was misreading that my whole life. And then last year I talked to the playwright Charlotte Aline about it, and she was like, oh, Juliet's talking about like how good he is in bed. And I was like, wow, it's tracking very differently for me now. And that's the fun of reading these more than one time, because obviously like the reading we all got in high school of it is very surface level because we don't know the nuance of the, vernacular. The way that like we all talk now is not, it just like joking things we'll all say has gotten to the point where like we're referencing TikTok jokes, and that's obviously going to sound surface level. Like, 50 years from now, you have to learn the context of what they were saying. So like you said, like die meant to orgasm. So a lot of the dialogue then suddenly very different.
I also remember when I was in class, we learned about the whole like, do you bite your thumb at me thing? And we were all like, what the heck? And she's like, he's doing the middle finger.
I love that scene. I think it's so funny. And when we were doing it, and David was like, do you quarrel, sir? Like, it was like, it's so ridiculous. And it's like, I do bite my thumb, sir, but do you bite your thumb at us, sir? Like, Shakespeare could not have been like more over the top with like toxic masculinity is stupid if he tried. Because it's like, it's so in your face with those scenes because they're ridiculous.
They're like, we're men. Men fight.
Take it down a notch.
And even the one guy being clearly cowardly, being like, is the law on my side if I say yes? Okay, no. Okay, no. Then I'm not.
No, we're not. No.
I'm so serious. It's not my fault. Yeah.
What are some themes you want to discuss about it, Laura?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's so many interesting ones. I think one of the things that always intrigues me, since we were talking earlier about Friar Lawrence, is sort of this distrust of the church, that it is the priest who all of these people run to get advice that actually ends up essentially messing everything up. And I think it had a very specific historical context for Shakespeare in a world where Protestants and Catholics were constantly back and forth. But I think now it still has resonance in this idea of it's hard to know sometimes who you can trust.
Well, and he also, like, when the one, what's the friar's name who messes up getting the letters there? I'm blanking. Friar John?
Or like Friar Thomas or Friar John.
The friar who's supposed to get the letters, it has one job, doesn't do it, is so unfazed that he messed it up. And it's like, oh, well, these stupid...
Bummer.
these kids living in sin, like who cares? Because like it's also, yeah, it's like who can you trust? And the fact that like this is who these kids had to put their faith in was just like this sketchy guy who was like, I got a great plan, drugs. Like what?
Pretend to be dead. Yeah,
every time I'm like, just leave. Like you were gonna leave anyway. Like just go.
Yeah. It's like, so you jumped there for some reason.
It's like, wow, that escalated quickly.
It almost seems like he was an amateur scientist and he always wanted to try out this potion, and he was like,
we have a great plan. And when always take
like it was like he was a drug dealer and he like didn't have enough clients and he was like, okay guys, hold on, I got something for you back here in the back.
Also, like when Romeo goes to the apothecary and it's like, I need something that would kill a person really quick. It's not for anything like murder though. And the guy's like, all right. Like, because you said so. It's like
and I love that too, how he's like, well, you know, the law says it's death to anyone who sells this, but I need the money, so here, have the poison.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think also like just the theme of the unknown is big in this play, because the whole like what could have been if Romeo had like waited 30 seconds.
And that idea of like fate between them and like it was all going to end this way.
Yeah, and I mean the idea of also like, you know, what exactly is the reason these houses hate each other so much? Obviously nothing important. When Mercutio says a plague on both your houses, like, you know, and the plague is the death of each of their children. And yeah, I mean, obviously it's like this was never going to be escapable, because in the beginning of the play, it's like they will die. This is how this will happen. And yeah, I just love this play. I love this play so much.
Yeah. And I think we talked about that earlier as well, but like another theme is like the idea of like youth and what it means to be young and experiencing these things for the first time, because it does all happen so quickly and they do have so much confidence in all of their abilities, and yet it all goes wrong because it was bound to go wrong.
Yeah, I think, and again, like not to bring this back to Taylor Swift, but like when she changed the ending for the song to be like, and the song came out on her second album, which was clearly like, I was 15 when that album came out. So like I was like the exact target age that they wanted listeners to be for the album, like literally the album with the song 15 on it. So obviously like if you're a teenage girl falling in love for the first time, like Juliet, Taylor Swift wrote the ending we wish got to happen. And Taylor Swift, I remember in an interview talked about that it's that when she wrote the song, she basically meant it as like the song is literally Juliet's fantasy. That's of course not what happened. Like that's her whole point in the song, was that of course the whole bridge where Romeo comes and they marry each other never happens. That's just what Juliet deeply wishes could happen and can't, because she also has like the being torn between her born family and her chosen family, because her birth family is abusive and mean, and Romeo's her chosen family. And so when the nurse is like her chosen family too, and so when the nurse is like, oh, but he's killed your cousin, and she's like, but he's my family now, like you don't get to, you know, decide who I love and who I, you know, the whole idea of like your family isn't always the family you're born into. She chose these other people who understood her more in her heart. Like she dreamed of a world where it wouldn't have to be that way, that she could have both. But
I mean, that moment's always so chilling, right after her father and mother sort of threatened to throw her out, and she asks the nurse for advice, and the nurse's response is, well, I think after all, maybe it's a better choice to marry Paris.
Yeah.
It was like such a betrayal in that moment.
So sad.
You know, the nurse got the two of them together, and now she's like, actually, I made a mistake. It wasn't practical.
Yeah, it's like, it was all fun. It's the nurse. I know a lot of people like the nurse. I think the nurse is funny, but like as a person, I hate the nurse because she is almost like amused by this. And then when it like gets too real, she's like, oh, okay, never mind. Like to her, it's like, oh, how cute, kids like playing pretend, like I'll be the cool aunt and like help them sneak around. But then the second there's like stakes behind it, she's like, never mind, like marry Paris, like your feelings don't matter, you'll get over it when you get older. And it's always that idea too of like, oh, this won't matter to you when you're older. And I was in love with someone in high school when I was 15, and it's like now I'm an adult and I'm never like, yeah, that wasn't love. Like it was just the kind of love that a 15-year-old feels. And back then, if you're expecting 15-year-olds, like 14, 13-year-olds to get married, then it's like the idea of like, again, women are so stupid and women can't understand anything, that it's like, you need to get married, Juliet, but also like, you don't know what love is. So like, whatever, just like marry Paris, shut the fuck up about the Romeo thing. You'll get past it. It's like, you don't get to choose when you want women to be adults and when you want to be allowed to treat them as children. And
it's also like, even if she did end up marrying Paris and like move on, like she would always be wondering what could have happened with Romeo if she continued to stay with him. Like that question would have stayed with her.
Somebody write that too. Somebody just get these going, get these spin-offs. The Tybalt.
Yes. Well, you know what happened is it could be like an Again But Better, where she goes through her life and then she goes back.
No. We read this book where like this girl like gets to relive her college years and do it again but better, and it's ridiculous. And so,
good idea. Yeah.
Don't we all win? But the thing is, like, she lives it again, but then like just I don't know. It's such a crazy book, but she like gets a magic like fairy godmother out of nowhere who's like, here's a button to like try and do your life again, and if you don't like it, you can just reset it. And so it's a ridiculous book.
Yeah.
I feel like that almost is what Lady Capulet and the nurse are doing with Juliet, though. I feel like they're both slightly unhappy in their lives, and they feel like she has a better chance. I mean, the way that two of them talk about Paris being a man of wax, clearly they would both love to marry Paris, and that's one of the reasons they're pushing her on him. So I feel like there's a certain element of, I can relive my life through you, young child.
Yeah, and it's also like, well, it could be worse. Like, you could have to marry someone like your father, Juliet. Like,
like
so,
he's doing pretty good for himself.
You want to talk about fun dialogue? I know Laura already mentioned the one, but I always have marked the entire opening because I just think it goes so hard, the whole beginning prologue. And there's actually on Halsey, the singer's second album, the first song is literally just her reciting this with like this organ music in the background. And it's haunting and beautiful. And then it like blends perfectly into the first actual song of the track called Heaven in Hiding. Mm-hmm. And she wrote that whole album as like a bisexual Romeo and Juliet concept album. It's very interesting, but I always love all the words in the opening. And my favorite part in the opening is the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. Mm-hmm. Like the idea that like them dying was what needed to happen to show these people that their hatred was unjust. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have so many marked, so like someone else chime in.
Yeah. Well, I really love the balcony speech where she's asking, like, why does he have to be Montague? Why does she have to be a Capulet? And like that idea of like them being torn apart, and like if they just had different names, it all could have just ended up so easily, but yet they're in this situation. And I think like that, her like relinquishing her name and saying like they're in love and everything, I think that's just like a really powerful scene, and everyone knows it. So I think like that also adds like that in like the general consciousness.
The rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Mm-hmm. This is not like a beautiful line. It's just, I always think this line is funny between Samson and Gregory in scene 1, act 1. I will be civil with the maids. I will cut off their heads, the heads of the maids. The heads of the maids are their maiden heads. Take it in what sense thou wilt. Like that Shakespeare right from the get-go was like, they're obnoxious. And like, they're like frat guys, basically. When we were doing it, Laura, I was in the, we'll have our screens off if we're not in the scene. And so in the Zoom chat, I said, I'm about to play Romeo like a frat boy. And Bridget was like, wear a backwards baseball cap. And so I did that the whole show. That was my costume to be Romeo. And it's like, that's totally how they're all acting at the beginning. They're like, we're so cool. We're from the house of Montague. Like, check us out. Like,
I don't know. You go.
On the other side of the coin, I always just love the fact that the 14 lines leading up to Romeo and Juliet's first kiss at the party is a sonnet.
Yeah.
I think whether you think of it as the two of them like being romantic and knowing they're doing it, or whether you just think of it as they're so in tune that their love language is a sonnet, either way, it's just kind of gorgeous.
I agree. Yeah. And a lot of times they just, even when it's not a sonnet, they just still will end up rhyming with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's just, oh God, so beautiful. What are other lines you like, Bridget?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Hold on.
I'm not going.
I'm like, where do we start?
There's so many. It's like when we did Midsummer Night's Dream and Bridget, like some of the plays, like we did Winter's Tale and we were like, we have absolutely no dialogue. And we were like, and then we did Midsummer Night's Dream and we were like, this line, and this line.
Don't waste your love on somebody who doesn't value it.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Obviously that end scene where they're like, thus with a kiss I die.
Yes. I like from Romeo in Act 2, Scene 1, can I go forward when my heart is here? Mm-hmm. Like the idea of this is I also like when he says he jests at scars that never felt a wound, right before the balcony scene starts. Like he has no idea what this feels like.
Did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night.
Everything in the balcony scene is so gorgeous. Like the brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp.
Mm-hmm. Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow.
That's another thing, like parting is such sweet sorrow is literally just like one of the most famous things anyone ever says, period. And it's like half the time people don't even know they're quoting Romeo and Juliet if they say parting in such sweet sorrow. Like
and that is another lovely one when Romeo's leaving after their first night together and Juliet says, yes, then window let day in and let life out.
Oh God, it's like
a punch. Yes.
I'm trying to. There's so many that are just so beautiful. I also like that when Romeo, when he kills himself, he says, "Here's to my love," and he does it like he's raising a glass, like you would have a toast at your wedding, and like toast, like, "Oh, I love my bride," this, that, and he says, "Here's to my love," and does it to kill himself to be with her, like.
Yeah.
And then she's like, and with a kiss I die is like, you may now kiss the bride kind of thing. Like their wedding night is the night they die is just.
And that she saw that coming. I mean, even in the party saying to the nurse, if he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed.
Exactly.
And it goes right away. It's like, there's no way my life can go now.
Here's a line I highlighted that like is more of like, again, people like coming at Romeo's masculinity as Friar Lawrence in Act 3, Scene 3 saying, art thou a man? Thy tears are womanish. Thy wild acts denote the unreasonable fury of a beast, unseemly woman in a seeming man. He's basically like, ew, you have feelings? Knock it off. And that's for ladies.
Okay.
Like, it's a woman thing. We're not doing that here. Like,
but soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. I love comparisons to like light and everything. I think that's just.
I do too. Yeah. There's also this scene reminds me a lot of a scene that I know is one of Bridget's favorite scenes in all of Shakespeare canon, and it's the sun and moon scene from Taming of the Shrew. The scene in Act 3, Scene 5, when Romeo needs to leave, and Juliet says, "Wilt thou be gone? It is not yet near day. It was the nightingale and not the lark that pierced the fearful hollow of thine ear." And then they're arguing if it was the nightingale or the lark, and if it's late at night or if it's early in the morning, and they're doing the thing. They're like, okay, well, like if you say it's late at night, then I'll stay. And it's like, no, it's the lark. You gotta go. And it's like, we said
back and forth.
Yeah, we said it was also like in the balcony scene was like the old school equivalent of like, no, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. It's like they're so in love. They're like, no, you like
totally is. Yeah.
And like never wanting to leave.
With the light that you said, Bridget, is at the end, near the end of that scene, Romeo says, more light and light, more dark and dark our woes. Like the happier we are together, the worse things will become. So it's like, Laura, there's all this subconscious foreshadowing in their literal dialogue that this will end horribly.
Yeah. And then some of the lines in the fights are really great. I've always thought if ever I were to get into a fight, which hopefully I won't, but I would want to start it by saying, "Come, you cat catcher, will you walk?" Yeah.
I also, like, have at thee, boy, is, like, I'm looking, there's more.
When Romeo says, "I defy you, stars."
Oh yeah, like, and then again, like that became such an iconic thing, like to defy the stars, like literally, like that phrase, that turn of phrase dates back to this. Also, just like the way that this is such a great beginning, it has such a great ending. The last line, "For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo." And I think it's really telling that it ends not saying like Juliet and Romeo, it says of Juliet and her
Romeo. It's like that she was hers.
it's almost like they're saying this was Juliet's story, and this is like,
and it's also like interesting because it's Juliet's story that like she's the one who's like in the possessive there of like he is hers, not like she is his, and that would be typical at the time and even up until almost the present.
So you have next in the outline the movie. Laura, have you seen High School Musical? Are you familiar?
I am embarrassed to say that I've actually never watched it, and I keep reading it, and it has not happened.
No,
I was supposed to watch it this week, and my thesis took over. I will be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So when we were planning out, like a year ago, when we were planning out what plays we would read what month, and we were picking movies to go with them, because Bridget was like, "Oh, we could watch a movie each month too." When we got to this, I immediately said, "I'm not watching West Side Story because I just don't really like that musical that much." And Bridget said, "Okay, what do you want to watch? Like the Leonardo DiCaprio one?" I said, "No, High School Musical. That's what we're watching." And because we, and so we usually when we do our Bard Book Club movie night, 90% of the time it's just me and Bridget because we're watching like obscure Shakespeare movies that like no one else.
People are like, "No, I'll pass."
You're like, "We're good, guys." We said we're watching High School Musical, and it was like 7 other people or something joined it. They were like, "We're coming," and we all like remembered all the words.
You're singing along with the songs.
It's about like kids in 2 different cliques in the most over-the-top Disney Channel stereotype of high school. Like,
they gotta stay in their own zones. Troy can only play basketball, and Gabriella can only be smart girl.
Yeah, and they come together is auditioning for the winter musical. It turns out they both are just like great singers, and then they like basically are like, "We don't just have to do this, we can do other things." And they sing "Stick to the Status Quo," which was one of the greatest pieces of musical theater. And this is what skyrocketed Zac Efron and Corbin Bleu and Vanessa Hudgens' career, specifically Zac Efron. Even though he didn't even sing in the first one, they voice dubbed him because his singing voice wasn't strong enough, which we all learned like years later, and we're shook because he sings in the second 2, in High School Musical 2 and 3.
And he sings so well in The Greatest Show. But anyway.
He was very young when they cast him in this. And the acting is hilarious because like it's not bad acting.
It's just like Disney Channel acting.
Disney Channel musical theater acting. But another reason I always think High School Musical is cool is because a lot of people credit it with bringing back the movie musical because they had tried with Chicago to bring the movie musical back. And while Chicago itself was very successful, they still didn't really keep making movie musicals. And then this came out in 2006 and was this overnight success. And then Disney Channel original musicals became a thing, which hadn't been before. And they immediately were like, make High School Musical 2, make the Cheetah Girls 2, and make it a musical when the first one hadn't been. And then movie musicals started coming back to the main screen. And now movie musicals are just constant and happen all the time. And a lot of people think High School Musical did that. And because like we put it on and we had all seen it at different points in our life. Then there was like 7 or 8 of us in the call. We all remembered every word to every song. We remembered like the ending dance.
There's like a dance, and they would teach it. And sometimes on Disney Channel, they'd have the marathon, and like during the commercial breaks, they would teach you how to do the dance.
Like in the commercial breaks, and you'd learn like a little bit each commercial break. They'd be like, "Welcome back, guys. Next, we're gonna do this." And,
and then at the end, they'd be like, "You can dance along now."
And they'd be like, "Put it all together." And so yeah. Anyway, we watched that because I thought that was just a really fun thing. And what I think's fun about it, like I said earlier, is when I tell people I think that's my favorite Romeo and Juliet adaptation, 9 times out of 10, it has never occurred to them that that's a Romeo and Juliet based story. And like our friend Gabby was so shook when I said that. And she was like, "Yeah, you guys were like, and then this month for the Bard Book Club, our pick is High School Musical." And I was like, "Why did they pick that for this?" And she was like, and then I thought about it and was like, "Oh my God." And so I said in a TikTok like a few months ago, I was like, "Oh yeah, the best Romeo and Juliet adaptation is High School Musical." And all these people in the comments were like, "This had never occurred to me." And I think that furthers the point of why this is the most successful play is because you can literally put this story in a goofy Disney Channel musical and it still works. And it's
nobody's gonna know.
How would they know? Bridget, do you have anything to say about High School Musical?
Yeah, I think it, as you said, like because like people don't even realize that it's the same story told over again. I think that kind of just adds to how universal it is and how like you can put it in so many different scenarios, and yet it's still that same core story.
I mean, High School Musical is also so clever that it's not even like it's just the outline. Like, literally, you can match characters up. Like, Chad is clearly supposed to be Benvolio, like a combination of Benvolio and Mercutio. And the parents are the parents. And
the parents are the parents.
The parents are the parents. And, you know, Miss Darbus is like the friar. And
then Gabriella's friend, I don't remember her name.
I always forget her name. It's not that's the actress's name. Taylor is her name.
Yes, Taylor's like the nurse.
Yeah, she's like the nurse. And that's the thing is like, if you know, you don't need to know Romeo and Juliet to enjoy High School Musical. Clearly none of us did when we watched High School Musical in middle and elementary school. But then once you know Romeo and Juliet and you watch it, and especially watching it, you know, as adults watching it, knowing we were watching it for a discussion about Romeo and Juliet. This time I really was like, there's that beat, there's that character, there's this, and it's
there was like a scene where like he shows up at her house and we were like, oh, it's the balcony scene.
And then he literally gets on the balcony. She literally has a terrace outside her room and he gets on it, and it's like, obviously
it's a little weird because like she turns around, he's just there and you're like, what the heck? And they're like on the phone.
Obviously he obviously like it has a happy ending. They kind of like do the sad ending with like the miscommunication through the webcam thing, which sounds
they have this like webcam and he's like, okay, I'll never be with her and I won't audition.
Like, singing doesn't even matter, I'll play basketball. It's like it's ridiculous. It's over the top, like about like, oh, high school cliques, it's Romeo and Juliet. But, you know, obviously then in the end, that's not what happens. And they sing, we're all in this together. And like, honestly, not to get like too sappy, but the fact that in the end, they have like a callback for the audition for the musical. And the callback song they sing is called Breakin' Free. And they're like, no one can hold us, this, that, the other thing. That's clearly supposed to be the idea of like, that's what Romeo and Juliet wanted to do, is to break free and to be able to live their lives and no one could stop them. And there's literally a backdrop of stars behind them while they do that. Like, once you know Romeo and Juliet, it actually becomes the most heavy-handed adaptation I've ever seen when they like try to modernize the story. And so that's why it's so fun to tell people it's Romeo and Juliet. So we highly recommend, Laura, you should check it out.
Yes, you should check it out.
It's like
it's
an hour.
Underrated. No one talks
to watch it.
Yeah, talks about it. I really think it's gonna take off.
I will say, I think the second one is the best one out of the three.
I do agree. Yeah, the second one is my favorite, but the first one is still really fun, and it's very much their costuming was very much like early 2000s Disney Channel, because we all kept being like, who would wear this? Who would go to school dressed like this?
Like Gabriella had like this belt that she just wore over the belt loop. She didn't come through the belt loop, just over top. And it's like
it was just so funny. We were like, I don't think the screenwriter ever went to high school, because this is not how high school works. And
you can't do two things.
But it was so funny.
Well, that's fun too. There is that Shakespeare connection, and it sort of brought back the movie musicals, since I know some people argue that Shakespeare wrote the first musicals because there's so much music that's intricate in The Tempest and in Much Ado About Nothing and in Twelfth Night.
Yeah.
Fun. Yeah.
Even in like Hamlet, Ophelia never stopped singing. And we always joke in our readings, like, who's going to end up having to sing, because there's always a song in a Shakespeare thing. And we always say, we're like, we don't know what tune these go to. And we're like, were these songs back then? Like,
I have a CD of supposedly the original settings, but I think it's suspect. Probably a lot of it got made up by David Warwick in the 18th century.
When we did Hamlet, I was playing Ophelia, and it was like every other scene, all my lines were just me singing. And I was like, what do I sing this to? And like our friend Simon in the chat was like, Ophelia's playing at Coachella this year. And like, that's the thing, is it's so, I'm like, are these known songs from the era? Like, he wrote them in there and everybody was like, oh, I love this one, turn up.
This cover of this song is so good.
Yeah, so yeah, Shakespeare inspired the movie. It also brought back the Disney Channel original movie, because they just hadn't made any new ones in a really long time, and then they made that in 2006. Launched Zac Efron's career.
But also, just before we talk about the other things we have, we could also just talk about other adaptations, since like I'm sure we've.
Yeah, what's your favorite adaptation, Laura, of Romeo and Juliet?
That's such a tricky one, because I feel like I like different adaptations for different reasons. I mean, as I mentioned, the first one I ever saw was the Zeffirelli, and it is beautiful people in beautiful costumes and beautiful locations. So that's a lovely thing. But I also must admit, I have a fondness for the BBC one from the 1970s, just because Alan Rickman is such a kick-ass adult. So he alone is worth watching that one for. But then I do think that the Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio one is clever just in the way that they adapted things so cleverly. Like, I love the opening speech being the news broadcaster. I think that was kind of a stroke of genius. So there are things in it that aren't my favorite. Overall, that one is a lot of fun and really creative.
It really catches your eye from the start. And I was like right up in a car and everything. Doesn't that like how it starts out too? Yeah.
And as we said, like just like the balcony scene, like there's so many TV shows and like kids TV shows where like in their school they're putting on Romeo and Juliet, and like, and that was just a common trope. Like the kids would be putting on that play at school, and so then like they would somehow tie it into the episode and stuff like that.
I mean, that's like in middle school I did the play I Hate Shakespeare, and in it they show like different versions of it. So like they have one scene where it's the balcony scene, but there's traditional Juliet and then there's modern Juliet. And so like traditional Juliet will do like some of the lines, and then modern Juliet will be like, Romeo, where are you? I'm in the food court. Like,
I really love the musical Something Rotten, and yeah, and so there's that part when the playwright Bottom and Shakespeare are like having like a tap dance off, and the Shakespeare starts listing off at that point in time all of his successful plays, like as he's tap dancing, and then his last one he goes, oh, did I forget Romeo and Juliet, and like then he finishes and the audience like goes crazy because the idea is like that's the greatest play that he's ever written and anyone ever will write, and you know, so
there's nothing more iconic than that, honestly.
Yeah, there is, and like I said, like the Halsey concept album that was Romeo and Juliet, and Shakespeare's or Taylor Swift's song that was Romeo and Juliet, and it's everywhere. This story is everywhere. People quote it without realizing they're quoting it. Literally, the first time I heard a line from this was in The Princess Diaries. She's reading it when her grandma gives her stuff. I remember hearing her reading "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet," and like I saw that when I was like 7. I don't know what that was from, but I distinctly now, whenever I hear that line, think of that scene in The Princess Diaries, because that's how ingrained this story is, more so than any other Shakespeare play. And I just think it's really baller that a story about a teenage girl is the most famous Shakespeare play, you know, by the most famous playwright. So you want to tell everyone what we're doing for next month?
Yeah.
So next month we are reading Henry V, and we will be watching the Henry V episode of The Hollow Crown. And for the updates on when the live cast recording will be, and our discussion and our movie night, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @bard_book. And thank you so much, Laura, for being here.
Thank you so much for being here.
Where can
people find you on the internet if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Yes, so I am on Instagram, and it's currently Laura Rocklyn, and I am in the process of rebranding. I will have a new name that I'm revealing shortly. So I'm easy to find there. I also have a website, which is very creatively laurarocklyn.com. So if you want to check out either of those, I've been doing lots of online performances and things lately, which has been really fun.
I love seeing your pictures on Instagram and all your different historical dress. It's always so, I'm like, she's just living like the Regency cosplay dream out here. Like, I love seeing it. Well, thank you so much for joining us this month. This has been amazing. So fun talking it. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you next month. More Bard Book Club. Goodbye.
Bye.